Morning, everybody. I think everybody is present this morning. We can run around the room here and on the screen, and you can introduce yourselves. So Dan, you want to start?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Dan Smith. I'm an attorney practicing in Montpelier, Vermont, and have specialized in milk market regulation for a number of years and worked for the Vermont legislature as legislative counsel for the House and Senate Agriculture Committees, among other committees back in a long ago time.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Representative Mike Marcotte from Coventry. I represent Coventry, Irisburg, Newport City, Newport Town, and Troy, and I chair House Commerce and Economic Development.
I'm Senator Randy Brock. I represent Franklin County and part of Grand Isle County. I'm on the Senate Finance Committee, and I'm also the Senate Minority Leader.
John O'Brien.
Good morning, everybody. I'm State Rep John O'Brien. I serve on House Ag and Forestry, and I represent South Royalton, and my hometown of Tunbridge.
So John O'Brien, John Robert.
The other one. John Roberts. I'm the executive director of the Champlain Valley Farmer Coalition based in Middlebury, Vermont, presently in Texas.
Heather.
Morning, I'm Heather Darby. I'm with the University of Vermont Extension. I'm an agronomist and soil specialist based out of St. Albans.
And Jackie.
Morning, everyone. I'm Jackie Folsom, retired dairy farmer from Cabot, Vermont, actually working for Cabot Creamery right now in retail sales, and also legislative director for the Vermont Farm Bureau and advocacy director for the Vermont Fairs and Field Days.
Michael.
Hi, I'm Michael O'Grady. I'm legislative counsel.
And we have Linda Lehman in the corner keeping track of us, and I'm Bobby Starr, Senator from Essex, Orleans County. I chair the Senate Ag Committee, and pleasure to be here. So welcome everyone, and this is, I believe, our 9th or 10th meeting. And we're trying to get thoughts and ideas now rounded up and put together to do a final report and move forward with suggestions of either legislation or a report certainly to the legislature in whole on our findings. We've heard from well over 50 different people, from farmers to manufacturers to regulators. And so we've covered, I think, a lot of ground. And to me, it seemed like we had some short-term issues that we could deal with maybe during this next year, and some long-term issues that are going to take more time to develop and to move forward on. I think you all got communications from Linda in regards to thinking about what you heard as individuals and what you would like to add to a list or delete from a list if we get to that point. And Dan and I kind of broke it up a little bit between us as co-chairs on dealing with short-term issues, and Dan was going to do long-term, more on the long-term issues. Some of the short-term issues that I heard about, that I heard and took in where that I think we could deal with is transportation. We heard a lot from different speakers or guests that we had in trying to help with the CDL licensing, and I think Michael and Randy both serve on economic development and can work with labor people on speeding up maybe and helping with CDL certifications. We also heard that regional weight limits would help the haulers and the co-ops to be able to move more of their milk in a more systematic way and not face different state weight limits as they travel in. The other issue that we heard quite a lot about was trying to figure out a way to do water quality along with enhanced soil improvements. We heard a lot about how better soils and help retain more water and help clean up our streams. The other issue, I guess I skipped one on transportation, was helping with driveways so farmers could get bigger, or the milk haulers could get bigger trucks into the yards, and where that would improve the ability to put together larger loads, as well as maybe keeping runoff, because if you had to put a new driveway in, it would help on water quality from runoff from the yards. Another issue was trying to, some farms have bulk tanks that are small, so they have to have everyday pickup. And with everyday pickup, of course, it costs them more money. And so with fixing the yards and allowing larger trucks to pick up the milk, if they had the right size bulk tank, they could have every other day pickup instead of on a daily basis. That was one concern that we heard, or several concerns. And I don't know, I think Efficiency Vermont, they have a tremendous amount of money that they put into making our electricity more affordable and helping to do that. I think if they don't have the right language in their charge of duty to help with something like that, we could certainly improve that language that would do it. The ecosystems and that soil health, we heard a lot on that from the agency in regards to how well it was working, but that's a big issue on retaining water and having better soil health and making our land more productive. So there's an opening there to do more, or that we could recommend doing more through that way. Another issue that we heard that really doesn't cost a whole lot is somebody mentioned, one of our guests, try to use up the federal money that's allotted to us and don't leave it sitting on the table, because we don't have enough people or enough helpers to expend that money, and it has to get returned. We should be utilizing as much of that money as possible and encouraging the agencies to utilize this federal money that's allotted to them. One of those issues that we've already dealt with in the legislature was a few years back, we appropriated $75,000 to VHCB to have a person write grants, and grants on money that is sitting on the table, but nobody ever went after. And I think Gus reported that that person is in just 2 or 3 years has generated over $4 million new dollars that went to different communities and organizations from that person that he hired. So there is a lot of federal money that's still left sitting on the table that we should try to utilize. I don't want to ramble on here too long. And the other thing we heard, I believe, is that state regulations that we control should be made more flexible so that if a farm gets a grant, that they have, depending on the weather, a lot of different circumstances, that they would have some mobility and moving that money around a little bit to make the grants, if at all possible, as flexible as possible, so that we don't lose that. I think, Dan, I don't know, there's probably a dozen other small issues or issues that are short term that we could talk about. I don't know if did you want to go into your longer term issues?
Well, I think I can back and fill a little bit on your summary, and then
Yeah.
So I would back up one step and say that the task force was created with a direct charge to build on the Department of Financial Regulation report, and that our charge was to identify issues and problems related to dairy farm viability that have resulted in such an exodus of, pushing 65% of the farms have exited since 2000. And DFR reported on their findings as to what that had happened and made some recommendations about what to do. And our charge is to follow up on that report, both in terms of filling out their analysis of the problem and identifying solutions. And that each of the members of the task force was appointed to bring a varied perspective to both the identification of the problem and the hopeful identification of solutions. I think, as Bobby said, the testimony disclosed, I think in a very useful way, that there's a distinction between what the legislature might do in the short term versus what the state might do in the long term. And Bobby and I spent a lot of time, as he said, sorting through that. I also think, however, that Bobby's point about farmers being providers of eco services is a very important finding of this task force that came out of the testimony that we've received, that really reflects an evolution in the discussion about the dairy farm situation in Vermont. The focus has always been on farm viability, financial viability, and we're now introducing the concept of farmers being part of the solution to the climate change issue, and being able to provide services, eco services, and what can the state do to provide incentives for that, and to facilitate that process of establishing farmers in that role. And I think that that will be an important finding for this task force that's new. And then finally, as Bobby said, I would also add that, and this for me has affected both the work and the proposals that we've batted about. We're in an unusual time in which there will be a substantial amount of federal money available to be used in a constructive and creative way. And that, I think, is both a reflection of the pandemic times, but it's also a reflection of a change in the approach of government to dealing with dairy farmers. For forever, the expectation was that the market would find a return to farmers, and that the government was not going to get involved in affecting return to farmers. And the federal order system, until recently, there were no subsidies involved in the federal order program. It was a market regulation that set a minimum price to farmers with the expectation that that price would assure a stable supply of milk, and that if there was a return above that minimum price, then the market would provide that. Well, over the last 20 years, that system is not working anymore to serve that function, either at the regulatory level, at the market level. And as a result, the federal government has stepped in and has started to provide subsidization to farmer prices. But in looking at that a little bit deeper, what the government really is doing is providing a hedging program. And it turns out we heard testimony of a couple of hedging programs. Well, one of the DFR recommendations, in addition to trying to deal with the price that the federal government sets at the federal level, is whether the state could get involved in hedging, in setting up a program for hedging against the federal price. And so with the availability of federal money to support that idea, I think that that's something that we really should spend some time on, both in the short term and the long term. So I've tried to sketch out the beginnings of what that would look like as a kind of a co-chair proposal for a tangible solution. But really, at the same time, we're looking for your thoughts and reactions. So our summary is intended to kind of seed the discussion, and I'll lay out the specifics of that a little bit more, but that's really all it's intended to do, is to seed the discussion. We want to hear more from you. So in terms of, I would just back up. Bobby mentioned transportation. I would add, obviously price is a chronic problem. There was good testimony that somewhere between $23 and $25 is what's needed, not just to cash flow, but to earn a rate of return. And the price ends up being $18. So there's a $3, $4, $5 gap between cost of production and a return on income. Chronic problem. The testimony confirmed that. I think in addition, the testimony confirmed that the Vermont marketplace is completely transformed from being a market for the sale of raw milk out of state, and expectation and that the market would return a workable price out of that out-of-state market for fluid milk down to Boston. That market has really been changed, and Vermont farmers are now supplying in-state markets for higher value manufactured products. And so the grand challenge is there a $23 to $25 price in that transaction where Ben & Jerry's and Cabot and Commonwealth and DFA and Booth are buying milk from Vermont farmers right in state to make those products? Is there a higher price available somehow to be found in that transaction? The other issues I would add to the transportation question, access to markets. A lot of discussion that the consolidation of the marketplace is limited farmer choice. And there's also some thought that there might be some possibility of expanding capacity in the state beyond what we already have, whether that would be adding on to existing capacity at Cabot, Ben & Jerry's, et cetera, or whether there's some possibility of building a new plant that the task force should think about exploring. And then I think, at least for me personally, an important finding is the constant now identification of labor on the farm as being a real problem, and that's moved up in terms of being a problem that farmers are confronting. And how do we address that? So I would think that there's likely consensus that those are the issues. In addition, finding, as Bobby said, water quality, soil health, eco services, that's an additional issue to be addressed. So I don't want to ramble on either, but I did want to speak a little bit long-term to the pricing issue. I think we've identified from the testimony 3 possibilities of long-term action. One is a state regulation. The second is a user tax along the lines of what Maine does and return the proceeds of the tax to producers in some manner. And then the third is a hedge program that would build on what the dairy margin coverage program is doing, and also what Farm Credit is offering, dairy revenue protection, and see if in the long term there's a possibility of shaping those programs into a more comprehensive hedging program that the state might get involved with as part of the Farm Bill, as part of state legislation, but a longer term, not something we're gonna put together in the next month or so. It would be something that would have to be put together over time. And I think similarly that we focused a lot of attention on understanding the market and addressing the fact that this federal money is coming. So we've been more focused on short-term issues. So it's going to take some more time to shape out, I think, the price regulation, whether that'll work and how, and what a user tax would look like and how that would work as well. So I think that, and the other long-term, I think, is the feasibility of either building a new plant or adding on to existing capacity. And I think it's a long-term, I don't think it's, 3 to 5 years, something like that, not super long-term, but it is quicker than a short-term. We're not going to build a new plant in Vermont in the next 6 months. We've got to figure out how to do that. But I think it's a very viable idea that we need to talk about. So in the sort of crossover short-term, long-term, Bobby and I want to put on the table a tangible idea, which is to build on what Jim Mulhern from National Milk proposed, and also Rick Smith mentioned, which is the state to participate directly in purchasing premiums coverage for the dairy margin coverage program. So the program basically offers farmers a chance to cover the risk between their feed costs and the all milk price. And there are different levels of coverage and different amounts of milk that can put in. The program is capped at a 5 million. There are 2 tiers. Tier 1 is up to 5 million pounds of milk production, and tier 2 is above 5 million pounds of production. And what Bobby and I are proposing is that the state would pay the premium coverage for up to the 5 million pound cap at the 950 level, which is where it's paid quite a bit of money. And according to Jim, on average, it's paid $1.56 a hundredweight. So the coverage costs 15 cents a hundredweight. The return is $1.56. So that program is really provided and paid real money to farmers. And the cost for the state to take that on is relatively small. My father used to say, money is money. Don't say money is small. It's coming out of your pocket. With that qualification point taken, in any case, at the 5 million pound cap, roughly 1.1 billion pounds of milk production in Vermont is produced on farms underneath the 5 million pound cap. In other words, Mike has 100 cow dairy. He's under the cap and is producing 2 million pounds of milk. I might have a 900 cow dairy. I'm producing over the cap, but I'm producing up to the 5 million. Randy has a 50 cow dairy. If you add up all of the producers, their actual production under the 5 million pound cap, it's about 1.1 billion pounds of milk. So the cost of the program at 15 cents a hundredweight would be about $1.6 million. So the state could cover to the cap for almost half of the milk production in the state. That would return $1.56 to farmers at 15 cents a hundredweight. So it's a 10x return on the premium coverage. So we have to sort out the details of how to do that. 75% of the farms and likely 75% of the milk is already in. So is the state going to reimburse producers for what they've already done the last couple of years? Number one, the program ends with the Farm Bill in 2023. So that's 2 years left. The eligibility for next year, 2022, has already been closed. So we can't get in and provide coverage for next year, but we can provide coverage for 2023. So we have to sort out to what extent we would be involved and how, and factor in that 75% of the farms are already in. So we're piggybacking on what has already been a rational decision that farmers have made. But in any case, that seems to be a tangible program that the task force can propose at a relatively reasonable cost to the state for a good return.
And I would just interject that 2 states are already doing this. It's Virginia and Maryland, and it's authorized under the federal law, which we confirmed with Jeremy Panett. And so it's not something created out of the ether. It's authorized by federal law. It's already being done in other states. And you can tie it to whatever eligibility you likely want, whether it's ecosystem benefits. You might probably even be able to get federal funding for it. So I think there's some possibility here, as evidenced by other states already doing it.
Yeah, Virginia ties theirs to an eco-service requirement. So that's something to discuss how to do. And my last piece is I'm trying to shape out a similar proposal for the Farm Credit Program, which is the Dairy Revenue Protection Program. It's really a hedge against the Class 3 or the Class 4 price. And the early indication is that we should be able to put something together again at a reasonable cost to the state. The federal government already provides some subsidy for the premiums to farmers. That program has not found as much application in the state of Vermont as the dairy margin coverage. I at this point can't really see why farmers have not chosen to do that. So it looks like if the state provides some education and push on that program, that can provide additional hedge against the inadequate price. And maybe we can find, something on the order of $2 a hundredweight back to farmers on a steady basis as a hedge. And so then we would be addressing the price problem and responding to the charge of dealing with the DFR report, which raised the issue of hedging as a possible new way to approach the pricing issue. So I think that's our summary together, Bobby.
Yeah, and on that summary, Dan, we talked when we figured it out that it's going to cost 1.6 million to cover the cost of the program. But how much would that generate? Because we had that number.
Yeah. So
for the farmers.
So if with Jim's number, the program has been 3 years now, 18, 19, and 20. And the amount of payout has varied quite substantially, but on average, it's been $1.56 a hundredweight. So Jim provided us an average. Jim provided us an average of $1.56 a hundredweight. So against the 1.1 million pounds of milk, that would be roughly $18 million.
Well, pretty good return of an investment of 1.6 million would bring back 18,
some 17, 18, something like that,
so
assuming that the $1.56 held going forward. And it could be this year's paid, in the first year paid the the national program paid out $250 million. This year, over $1 billion. So it could go either way. That's because it's an insurance, it's a hedge.
Yep.
Yeah.
Michael, did you have anything to add at this point?
Not on that. No.
No. May as well start with Senator Brock. So Randy, had you thought, I'm sure you have,
I
about
have.
what we might be able to do and what you've heard and
This is first, let me emphasize that this is a thought that is in draft form. It is not fully formed, and it's not necessarily a recommendation, but it is an idea. And we've discussed it briefly, and one of it is to tax the retail sale of fluid milk products to produce revenue to support the dairy industry. And the thought is to levy a 5-cent or 10-cent per gallon tax, defined and called a fee if possible, structured that way, on retail sales of all milk products sold in Vermont. Define milk as a product that uses the term milk, and that includes dairy milk, cashew milk, soy milk, and all forms of milk. The tax would be collected by the retailer upon delivery of the product to the retailer. The tax would not be directly imposed on a consumer in the form of something like a sales tax. To confirm efficacy, we need estimates as to the number of such containers sold annually, an estimate of the cost of collection, administration, and distribution of proceeds. And we also need a plan of distribution of the proceeds and the goal of the revenue transfer. And this could be a direct transfer to producers based upon production at a flat rate, depending upon farm size, provided these methods don't conflict with other strictures that we have based on federal law or otherwise. Alternatively, it could be used to fund advertising or promotional activities that don't go directly back, but that go to the purpose of bolstering or supporting the dairy industry and increasing its return on investment, but doing so indirectly, both in Vermont, but also in key market areas outside Vermont that buy Vermont fluid milk. The second thought I had is to redefine the term Vermont milk and capitalize on the change. Vermont has a reputation for quality and purity, and I think we need better strategies to capitalize on and bolster that reputation, especially with labeling and promotion of premium products. We should invest in strategies to advertise and emphasize Vermont as a high quality producer. Most Vermont milk is commingled with milk from other states and out-of-state processor facilities. One, to the extent that we can, to work with those producers to take at least some Vermont milk and not commingle it with other milk, so that it can be sold separately, particularly as a premium product known for quality and so on, that could perhaps command a premium price in some locations and in some narrow markets. The second is to look at the term Vermont milk and how we define it, because Vermont milk is whatever the legislature, says it is. And so if we were to allow some small quantity of milk that is not Vermont milk to go into it, but if it's predominantly Vermont milk, we should examine whether or not that would make sense and whether or not that would provide us with any competitive advantage for doing that. It may not, but again, it's just something that we should put on the table to talk about and pick it up. Those are essentially where I am, other than some of the things that you've already mentioned.
yeah. Very good. Michael?
On the short term, I think you touched on it a little bit, Bobby, on the labor issue in transportation and on the farm, but I think the labor issue is industry-wide. It's not just the producers and not just the distributors, it's also the manufacturers and the value-added manufacturers. I think we heard a lot with Cabot. They're not able to have weekend shifts because they can't find enough workers. That really cuts back on the amount of milk that is processed in a value-added way. And it's actually holding Cabot back from expanding into other markets. So I think that, we need to be looking on the short term on how we can get more people driving trucks, more people on the farm, more people into the manufacturing sector, so that we can move the products that the farms are producing. How we do that, not sure, because there's a lot of issues out there for on labor. There's housing issues, there's issues with childcare, a whole host of things that we're going to be looking at. So that's one thing that we need to work with Department of Labor, the Agency of Commerce, as well as the Agency of Ag, on how we structure all that, and take the resources that we already have at the Department of Labor, that money's coming into WIOA, that helps provide the trainings for the CDLs and other trainings. Are there more trainings or apprenticeships or internships that we can do? So I think that's a whole host of things we need to look at. When we look at, I think when we're looking at the long term, I like everything. I'd like to explore everything that Dan has brought up. I just want to make sure that whatever we do on the long term and whatever programs we may put into place, that we're not, the administrative costs are as low as we can possibly get. And we need to be careful that we're not growing a bureaucracy that's going to suck all the money into it and not get it out to the farmers. Also, you know, we look at Maine's, what Maine has put in. I think that could be something that is something we should explore. We need to realize that, you know, our Connecticut River and our borders with New Hampshire, that could be one reason why more Vermonters would go over the border into New Hampshire to purchase milk. I'm hoping they wouldn't, but I think as we have seen over the years with increased taxation on tobacco and other things, that we've pushed Vermont consumers across the border into New Hampshire. So we need to remember, be cognizant of that issue. I know that you know, Quebec has a subsidy on their milk, and I know, being on the border, we see a lot of Canadians coming over and they're purchasing their milk and bringing it back across the border. How much that is, I don't know, and I don't think it's, you know, is that going to be enough to make a change? But I think the survey piece of it before anything gets started is to see if Vermonters want that, if they would be willing to pay that extra money, would be a good start. If Vermonters are willing, then I think we should go for it, and you know, and continue on to create something that could be viable. You got to be careful that we're not laying more work onto the retailer. I think that, you know, at the distributor level, if that money is collected and then sent into the state, is the right way to go, instead of putting that onto the retailer. But I'm willing to look at, you know, everything. I think Randy laid it out pretty well. But I think, you know, all of those factors are something that we should be looking at.
If you did that, is that a way that, do we do beer that way, or any other products where you assess a fee on the distributor?
Yeah, the taxes, yeah, as they're sold.
So it's an issue that we're already doing, just on a different product. Yeah. John O'Brien, are you with us, or are you gone?
Here I am. Thanks, Bobby. You know, as far as any original thoughts I have, I think I defer to most of you. I think pretty much everybody on this committee has more experience in dairy than I do, both on just the milking a cow side up to the business side with Randy and Mike. And I also think a lot of really smart people have been working on this this subject for a long time, and mostly we're all losing the battle here. So even the Northeast Dairy Innovation Center, works day and night on trying to figure this out. So at least we know a lot of people are thinking about this. But as for short term, I think we should work with the agency, if there's anything legislative we can do to make sure all the Horizon farms, find somebody to pick up their milk before next August, would be pretty important. And connected to that, if there is vacant capacity in the state, which we seem to feel there was in places, somehow to get those plants going, either with a not-for-profit and state combination, or find venture capitalists who want to throw their hat into the ring. And also the labor and trucking issues that have come up, I think, are important. Long term, I go back to, we asked some of our witnesses what Vermont does really well. And besides being incredibly resilient, there wasn't, we don't really stand out, I don't think, compared to, any more than New York and Pennsylvania dairy farmers or Maine dairy farmers. It's a pretty tough lot if you're still in the dairy business at this stage. And that brings up the point that Dan was bringing up, that so much of this is trying to find more separation between what it costs to make milk and what you get paid for it. If there was that $5 separation, then dairy farmers would still make milk at $15 a hundredweight if they could produce it at 8 or 9, or at the other side, right? If we can get up to 25 for your mill box check, then it can be made at 18. So thinking about that, it seems like the faster we can move towards being maybe the first in the country on payment for ecosystem service combinations, because as Heather brought up, I think our farms have done the best job at regenerative farming already in the country, and we have the best soil in the country now. So somehow we have to market that and reward our farmers for the job they've been doing, and going forward to do more of that. Also, we heard a lot about how certain farms are paid premiums for higher quality milk or healthier milk. And so to move our farms towards that too, and then correspondingly market that. And if we have the healthiest milk, or our farms take better care of the soil, it seems like there's, compared to some of the mega farms we're hearing about, I think there's a marketing advantage for us there. I think maybe piggybacking on Randy's thought of a milk tax, I think it would be interesting to start essentially an endowment for a retirement succession fund, so that we create some good place where dairy farmers can retire financially, and like 401k type situations, and also some sort of incentive for younger Vermonters to go into dairy farming. And if there's something financially there, I think we'll help address that problem. I think that interestingly, that I understand, I'm not a big goat fan myself, but it seemed like of all the places in the dairy industry where there's need right now, the goat dairy is a place that could grow a lot, and it'd be interesting to make Vermont, the goat dairy capital of the country, and not rely on Quebec and Ontario. So maybe something financial there too, to help incentivize that. And then what everybody's been saying about building capacity here, either new or onto something else, we noticed that more and more where dairy farms seem to be maintaining or even adding on is where it's quite close to plant capacity. And we're really lucky we have what we have now. And maybe something along those lines, I was thinking on a marketing side, something Bobby, the ag committees passed was that the whole idea of local food. And so somehow in marketing to have, like a 30 stamp or 100 stamp of this milk was made 30 miles from where you live or 100 miles from where you live would be interesting to just a way to, because as we've all talked about, there's so much commingling going on. If the more we can make people understand it's local, and I know the dairy industry already does a good job at thinking of David Ainsworth on the side of tractor trailers of telling stories about where the milk comes from, but I bet we could even do more there. So I think that's it for me. I think hedging is a great tool because it once again, it goes back to that separation between what it costs to make milk and what you get in the mailbox. So that's a great idea.
Yeah,
so that's it on my end.
Thank you, John. Let's see, Jackie, you're right there beside John. You want to go next?
Sure. On my screen, I'm next to Heather, so I don't, it's all kind of screwy. Thanks, folks. So I went through all the testimony that we heard, and I was basically listening for the farmer's voice because they're the ones that we're trying to help here. And labor has been mentioned consistently on farms and in processing facilities, as well as drivers, distribution. I think Representative Marcotte hit it right on the nail. Everybody has got an issue with labor, and we need help. We need to figure that out. I know that the state has been working on through Senator Starr's committee. They gave a good amount of money into VHCB for farm labor housing, and we're working on that. We also need housing for the people that work at the plants such as Cabot. That's become a real issue, and they're actually housing people over in Groton and moving them back and forth. So it isn't just the H-2A program, which is a continual long-term issue. I remember going down to Washington, D.C. 25 years ago and talking with then Congressman Sanders and saying, we need help with this. And he said, yeah, we're working on it. So here we are all these years later, and it hasn't been resolved, and it's just getting worse. So that is an issue I wish it wasn't long-term. I wish it was short-term, but we need to have assistance down in Washington with that. I don't know if that's ever going to happen. Technical service providers, the farmers have talked about that, and I've actually had some offline comments from farmers who didn't testify to us as a committee. And I know that there's a couple proposals floating out there that say we need more, and I'm concerned that what we have may not be the right ones. They may not be enough. I don't know. I don't know who has a good list. I don't know who they are. I don't know what their expertise is. I'd really like to have a one-stop shop. And if it's at the VHCB, that's fine. But I think that if there's a more transparent way to find out how that works. From what I'm hearing, the farmers call for a technical service provider and they're assigned to one. And I've been hearing that it's not working. For some of them. So I'd really like to have a little more transparency in the technical service provider piece and try to figure out how we can make that more available and more useful to farmers. I know when the legislature voted 2 years ago to send the premiums out to the farmers with the ARPA money, there was a big rush to hire more technical service providers. I don't know if those folks are still working. I don't know who they are. I just think we need to have a better handle on what's happening in that field because we really need them. I think we've discovered we need them, but we need to make sure that they match well with the farmers. I do support paying the DMC premiums. I think that's very, very important. We need to promote it to all farmers. I appreciate that we're looking at paying up to the cap, but I'm a person that doesn't like to worry about size. And by doing that, we kind of are worrying about size. We're saying that we're only going to pay on that many pounds of milk. That's all good and well. I know we've talked about the fact that it seems that the larger farms have economy of scale. I guess that's a good, I don't know if it's an assumption or a reality, but I just don't like to be boxed in by size issues. And so if there was a way that we could, if we were paying the premium up to that 5 million pounds, is there a way that we can pay within the state for a little more? And of course, going back to the federal marketing order changes, that we're going to have to work on that. We are working, there is a subcommittee that's working on the Horizon issue. We've had multiple meetings and we've got one next week that we're going to be discussing possibilities and what we're going to try to suggest to those farmers. There's a very active website on the Agency of Ag website to help those folks. And they're actually looking at asking the USDA for subsidies to help these Horizon farmers transition back, oddly enough. A lot of them got assistance transitioning into organic, and now they're looking at transitioning them back. And on behalf of that group, I would also like to hope that maybe through the Senate and House Ag committees, we can look and see if there's some assistance we can give them either above and beyond what they may or may not get from USDA or on our own, because we are trying to keep those farmers going. The hauling issue, we've talked about CDL licenses, but on behalf of the farmers, and I know you all know this, the farmers pay those hauling costs. And so anytime the insurance or the price of fuel go up for the haulers, the farmers pay it. And I would really like to see us pay those hauling costs. I mean, if you want to help the farmers, that would be an amazing thing to do. We can talk about fixing their driveways. We can talk about getting them bigger bulk tanks. But in the end, we are paying those fees. And I got to tell you, when we moved up and started shipping to Cabot, we're 3 miles from the Cabot plant. Wow, we had pretty good hauling costs. But when we merged with Agrimark to make it a more even playing field, we all had to pay costs as if we were shipping to Boston. And that was a huge increase on our little farm. So I think if you could find a way to go back on the hauling costs and help subsidize that in some way, it would be huge. It would be a huge savings to the farmers. They do need more drivers. We do need to help with the CDLs. We do need to find drivers. But if you want to help the farmers, in my opinion, helping pay those hauling costs, getting that off their milk checks would be amazing. I mean, I know for a long time we've heard that one of the draws for the organics was that they didn't have to pay hauling. And now some of them are having to. And when they go back to, if this Horizon group transitions back to conventional, they will be paying hauling. So that's a hit. I would like to see us try to figure out how to offer training to farmers and employees on language. I've been seeing emails pop up out of Cornell that they've been doing webinars teaching Spanish with Spanish classes. And I think it's equally important that our farmers learn to speak Spanish, but I also think it's important that their employees learn to speak English. I think it's a two-way street, and it would help a lot towards making things go smoother on the farm. I think Senator Starr mentioned Efficiency Vermont. I would really like to have a more in-depth conversation with them as to what they've come up with in the last 10 years that is a direct economic impact to farmers, including methane digesters. I think somebody mentioned plate coolers weren't covered. There's been some issues not covering ventilation systems in heifer barns. So I think with all the money that they have, they could step up and maybe come up with something we haven't thought of, working with dairy farmers to use that money. One of the farmers talked about increasing the cover crop grants acreage. I think it's capped right now. And for some of the larger farms, it would help if those caps were increased. I would really like to see, and I think somebody talked about an ombudsman earlier on. We need better communication and cooperation between ANR and the Agency of Ag regarding regulations. Sometimes our farmers get buffeted, not knowing where to go, not knowing who to talk to. They're getting caught in the middle. And I know there's been some strides on both ends, but we need to really make sure that that works. We do need payment for ecosystem services for everybody. And so I'm hoping that we'll be able to figure that out. I'm not real keen on a huge promotion of transitioning to goats or grazing because for one thing, we also heard that Vermont Creamery is having problems with their labor issues in their plant. So, but the other thing is I haven't really heard, I mean, Jones Land is being touted as a big positive because they transitioned from cow to goat, but that is still really a young farm, and I have not heard anything in a long time. I don't know if the economic benefits have succeeded. I don't know if we've gone long enough down that road to really figure it out. And I'm also concerned about switching people to grazing. Not that it isn't a good thing, and not that we shouldn't look into it, but in our own ag committee, we've had an example where Representative Graham was kicked out of the grazing program because of his driveway. So maybe that's connected. I don't know. But I think that we need to be careful. We're trying to revitalize the dairy industry with the tools that we have, and asking people to transition makes it a little hard for them. I think we heard Abby Corse say pretty bluntly that she likes her cows and she wouldn't go to goats. And I think probably you might find that in a lot of other places. I'm concerned that we're talking about building other plants when we have plants that aren't capacity right now, such as Cabot, such as the Vermont Creamery plant in Websterville. I know we have plants that are available. I think the Thomas plant was mentioned and the Grafton plant. And I'm hesitant about building another plant until we can utilize with full labor and capacity and taking all that milk that is now being put on quota to build another plant. Let's get the ones we have that have been successful in the past and have worked well for our dairy farmers to make those work. And I just wanted to, there were a couple things that Danny talked about earlier and Senator Starr, and if I could just make a comment. There was a comment about using federal dollars that we have, and I would agree with that, but let's keep the strings off of it. Let's keep the strings down. I think we saw the challenges we ran into when we tried to give away all that money a couple of years ago, and it just was too convoluted for the farmers. And I think that what it resulted in was farmers becoming better record keepers and utilizing the technical service providers and that sort of thing. But let's just keep the administrative costs and the hoops that they have to jump through down. And I'm really interested in learning a little bit more about this hedging. I know that there's a lot of money coming into the state, but that won't always be here, I hope. I hope we all get back on our feet and we don't need this huge influx of funds and we're able to do these things on ourselves. So using that money into the future kind of worries me. And also I wanted to clarify on one of the pieces, I think it was something that Danny said, to buy the premiums into the DMC, that there would be compliance strings attached. And can I ask, were you talking about RAPS compliance, or was there something else that you were looking at besides that, or do we know that yet?
So in just using Virginia and Maryland, they had to implement a nutrient management plan.
Okay.
Chesapeake Bay, et cetera. So there's a similar type of, there's multiple alternatives in Vermont. You could even say, because Vermont farmers have been implementing nutrient management plans and have been complying and have led to 96% of the phosphorus loading reduction in Champlain, that you're going to reimburse for those costs over a period of time for those activities. And one of the things that underlies that, though, is that the agency generally only funds those farmers that are in good standing.
Right.
They don't fund farmers that are in violation or actively fighting the agency on coming into compliance.
Thanks, Michael. I know that there's in good standing written into laws, and I think I would agree with that. I was just wondering if there was going to be another layer, and that kind of, I just want to make sure that we're cognizant of the fact that it just adds more cost to farming. So thank you for that. Appreciate it. So that's all I had.
Yeah, thank you, Jackie. One question. I thought we heard from Agrimart or Cabot that they were basically at capacity if they had all the help. If the help all showed up and they had enough employees, they were already at capacity. Did I hear that wrong, or were you saying that they weren't at capacity, or they?
I think that they're at capacity for as many people as they have, but that means that they're not using all the milk that the farmers are producing. I know I had started working in the retail stores back in August, and the store in Waterbury was only open Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday because of staffing issues. They backed that down to Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and most of those retail staff were working at least 2 days in the plant because they couldn't get people to work. They were also pulling extra day shifts on Saturdays about once a month. They are working their employees to capacity, but the plants are not at capacity. They are not doing weekends. They're not doing some lines. So it's an issue. The farmers are on quota because they can't process the milk, and they can't process the milk because there's no labor. So it's a downward spiral. Yeah,
It's a labor issue.
it certainly is a labor issue on both ends.
Yeah,
But they're
thank you,
feeling it
Jackie.
more. They're feeling it more on the processing end right now.
Heather?
Thank you. Well, I'm glad that much of what I wrote down is much of what everyone has already said, which is really great. So let me touch on some things that I don't think I've heard yet, but so one was about these sort of infrastructure grants, and I think Bobby, you mentioned that driveways, et cetera. This is, that's a significant issue that I have seen. Basic infrastructural needs that are not being met on farms, and that would help productivity, would help the bottom line. And, you mentioned bulk tanks, expanding the size of the bulk tank for less, sort of pickups, which I agree with. But when I sat on the VHCB board and reviewed, the Commonwealth dairy grants, I think it was really shocking to me to see what people were writing grants for. And it was bulk tanks that were old and not running properly, water bowls. I mean, just things that, farms should be able to fix and have. And I think many of the items, as you already mentioned, could easily be related back to water quality in a lot of ways. But I think those infrastructure grants that are already available need to be expanded, as people have already mentioned. And one area that I see that's hugely important to the bottom line on farms is the fact that many farms don't have proper feed storage. And they are putting up really good feed that then goes rotten or bad because it's not stored properly, because they don't have proper storage. And all of that translates back to the bottom line, but also water quality. And so again, I think these infrastructure needs on farms, it's a short-term thing that I feel could be done. There's both federal and state cost share available, but we have to open our minds a little bit more to what, qualifies under those grants. And I think, I hear Jackie about, the hauling charges for sure, but combining that with less trips to a farm also saves fuel. And we know that we're dealing with a climate issue, and one of Vermont's biggest, challenges is transportation. And so reducing milk truck time, and effort out onto those farms pays bigger dividends beyond, I guess, really trying to relate all this back to bigger statewide priorities like climate and water. So I think those connections are there and they make sense, and they help me meet immediate needs on farms as well. So we have the Commonwealth Dairy Program that ties a business plan also to those applications. And I heard Jackie's concern too around the TSP piece. I think when you're saying that, Jackie, maybe you're talking mostly about the business planning efforts through VHCB. And, I think that's really good to tie some of these pieces back to the business planning. And I would agree. I actually think there's not enough planners that have dairy knowledge to be able to assist farmers. But agree with you, Jackie, just getting a better handle on that is really important. So the other, the tax on the dairy products, I had that on my list too. I had a different spin on it, Randy, but I liked yours better. So I won't, I won't say what mine was.
Come on, tell us.
No, I thought anything that came from outside of the region should be taxed, but our own products within the region shouldn't. But that could, we could have some retaliation outside of the region. But anyway, I'm wondering about incentives and access to, I call them municipalities. I don't think that's the right word, but schools, hospitals, other federal and state infrastructure and facilities. Like, are there incentives to actually have Vermont-based dairy at those locations? The prisons, the hospitals, the schools. We heard a little bit about this, I think, just from one farmer saying that they weren't able to get their milk into schools. And I just wonder, is there a possibility for incentives for the, tied to maybe other programs for schools and hospitals, et cetera, prisons, to really be focused on purchasing Vermont dairy and just having access to it? I think that seems to be an issue. I feel really strongly about the marketing pieces. I'm pretty sure it bothered everybody when it blared all over our TVs that California cows were happy cows. Yeah. I'm not saying they weren't, but why in the world was that everywhere? But we don't really, I don't see us promoting Vermont agriculture in that way. And again, I don't live in another state, so it's hard to say if that does happen. But it seems like we have so much to be proud of. And I think somebody said, well, I don't know if we're any different, but I know we're different. We have the strictest regulations really in this country. And instead of viewing them as sort of the, Debbie Downer of the party, we should be viewing the fact that our farmers have met these high standards and capitalizing on it from a marketing standpoint, in my mind, beyond just payment for ecosystem services, it seems to me those, ads and promotion of not just Vermont dairy, but every farm across the state meeting these standards is critical to our success, because clearly people do care about environment. We heard that from New England Dairy. And I just don't think we promote that. What we seem to promote is that farmers don't do enough. And I'm not saying this committee, but, I think it's something to be proud of and something that could be used to help market our products, not just within the state, but well outside of the state. We are different in that way, really different. I mean, all you got to do is drive into, no offense to New York, but have you ever seen a cover crop barely growing on any of those fields? No. And it just goes to show that we're operating at a really different standard, and we haven't captured that as a positive from a marketing standpoint, in my mind. We heard the Dairy Business Innovation Center and folks from the agency saying, we don't have those kind of marketing dollars. We don't have that kind of information because we don't have those kind of marketing dollars. Well, why don't we? How do we expect to sell more and show our worth without putting ourselves out there? So I think that's really important for all farmers in this state. I'm really concerned about the new climate law. I don't know, I should know more the exact name, but I think what concerns me the most about it is that there isn't conversation about the importance of local food production in this erratic climate. And I know that there are we've heard this, there are new requirements by law for industries to reduce their footprint. And there was no real thought in my mind around the fact that one of the biggest issues that populations are going to be faced with is food security. Like, the climate is impacting food production. And if we do not have farmers in our state, we are putting ourselves at significant risk. And I think that we need to have some strong language around the fact that producing food at home is a climate risk mitigation strategy. And having farmers and land available to produce food should be of the utmost importance to this state, not figuring out how to reduce more of the farms that we have. Store shelves are already pretty bleak if you haven't gone in the store lately, So to me, connecting this back to climate is really, really important. And again, I feel like my mind just keeps going back to, we have to have food production because of this erratic climate that's disrupting food systems all over the world. Innovation, I know we have the Dairy Business Innovation Center, and they're working a lot on many of these topics. But I just thought it was really interesting, and maybe this goes back to marketing and investigation. But when I saw that lineup of dairy products that really didn't resemble dairy products, it was like power milk, I don't know, like products that I'm sure are for sale in places outside of Vermont. It was clear that people were really into these products, designer dairy. And I'm not sure if we're really on top of that here. And I just felt like, again, going back to marketing and understanding the market for our farms is critical. And I know we have the New England Dairy Board and they do a great job too, but they're concerned about New England. We're concerned about New England too, but what about at home? Let's see here. I think maybe I'll end on that. The last piece I'll say, I guess, is about a focus. Technical service providers, we do know are important. They're critical, more so to some than others. But I really feel really strongly about this focus, both from a marketing perspective and technical service, on forage production. And it takes away, I think, Jackie, you mentioned like this focus on grazing. All Vermont cows eat grass. All Vermont livestock pretty much eat grass. Grass is at the core of our production system, and it needs some help, both from a storage perspective, field maintenance, fertility. It's at the core of our farms. And the better grass we can produce, whether you're grazing or you're, confinement farm, helps the bottom line and it helps the environment. So I guess I'll just end on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. John Roberts.
Well, I pretty much, this is relatively easy for me. I do not have a light bulb moment for you that no one has discussed. I really endorse a lot of what I've heard. One issue that did come up, which we often hear, no, not often, but we sometimes hear, is conventional organic farmers are in the same boat. They all have, there is no, one system is not doesn't appear to be a green light better than another system financially. They're all struggling. So that was sort of one interesting thing. What I've heard from everybody today, from Randy's tax system, Mike's labor issues, I think those are big things. John O'Brien, really like your idea, believe in it strongly about retirement succession funding, and maybe also an apprenticeship program to bring young farmers in that might provide, say, if they, they pass an apprenticeship program for 5 years, they get a better rate of capital lending to get into farming or something like that. Promotion, I think, is still a big issue, and Heather's comments on that are very important. I was interested that, I obviously keep an eye on what happens in the UK because I have a sort of interest in that. And they did a really intensive promotional program for dairy in the last year and a half and raised consumption of all dairy products by 18%, which is pretty significant. And maybe we need to, and it's not a criticism of New England Dairy in any way, shape, or form. I think they're remarkable people, but maybe if they had more money, we could be more innovative, or we could do something. I will comment. I'm down, in Hillsboro, Texas right now, about an hour south of Fort Worth, and the local store has Cabot cheese. It has Cabot cheese and Cabot Greek yogurt available, and it's good to see that stuff, our products, are available here, and I think that's important. Heather's issue about forage quality is a very vital thing, whether it's grazed or stored. There's an awful lot of feed wasted, and that would reduce the amount of grain farmers have to buy. It would be a really good product. a good thing to pursue. Oh, come on, what was, I will talk about the agencies, the conflict between the Agency of Ag and Agency of Natural Resources, unfortunately, is a real conflict. And I do think farmers are, as Jackie said, are the pinball being batted around in here, and they're never really sure where they stand. And I understand the federal laws about point source pollution. I mean, obviously, I worked for the Agency of Ag for 6.5 years. I understand that, but it's almost like they're trying to see who's more important, one or the other. And I really think their rules need to really emphasize, are we just layering on more bureaucracy or more rules for the sake of doing it? Or are we actually achieving better environmental goals? And I think, again, Heather pointed out that we have some of the toughest environmental rules for ag in the country. And, it's very hard to convince some people when they see blue-green algae, but that's a very complex issue. But we do have those rules. I would like to emphasize business management for farmers. I think, again, in my job now, last year I spent quite a little bit of time helping farmers get COVID relief money. And yes, it was an issue that they did not have the numbers readily at their fingertips to answer some of the questions. I think we could put an emphasis on that. Again, on what, backing up what Heather said, it's, in a way, it's, hopefully this is not heresy, but it isn't just about dairy. It is about our food production. And I think Vermont has a unique opportunity here, or a unique state. I mean, back in the 1800s, the Champlain Valley was known as the breadbasket of the East. Well, this state we produce more milk than all the other states, New England states, twice as much more milk as all the other New England states put together. I'm sure we produce a huge amount of other foods. And yeah, I don't have a problem with us promoting goat milk. I mean, I think the number I've heard is 8,000 more goats. That really isn't that many farms if they're managed properly. So, that's not going to be a detriment or to cow dairy or anything, but it's another source of income for people to remain in farming. And I do worry. I sit on the Climate Council, one of the subcommittees, and I do occasionally worry when I hear people expound on how we need more trees, we need more this, we need, but ultimately we're going to need to eat too. There are going to be trade-offs, and I think Vermont has a unique position, both climate-wise and position, location, and just sheer beauty that we need to market. Other than that, I'd be interested to see what we could do on paying for the DMC, the risk management programs. I think that's an important issue. Clearly, an investment of 1.6 million for a return of over 18 million is a pretty good investment. I certainly would buy a stock on that basis. I think that's something we should look at, see what we can do there. There isn't I think we should play a forceful role in the federal milk marketing order, and I defer to Dan about that because I know he knows way more than I do. But pricing of milk is such a federal issue. and a federal concern. So I think, but we should maintain and improve our position in that. It might be a little trickier as we lose our senior senator, but you know, that's life. You know, you keep going. So other than that, I don't have anything else to add at this point. I think we've got a number of interesting, sort of all little steps, but they could add up to a significant improvement for our farmers.
Yeah, thank you, John. Did you have any questions, Danny?
Well, I did have one concept that I wanted to add that I kind of brushed over too quickly, which is to kind of respond a bit to Randy's idea of a tax on in-state and Mike's concern about the border issue. What I want to propose that we should discuss, and John, I'm also responding to what you said. I don't think pricing at this point is only a federal issue for Vermont because of the change that's occurred to the Vermont marketplace. So we're now using something between 50 and 60% of the milk in state. So the state now has, I believe, legal jurisdiction over that milk. And I say I believe because the analysis I've done would suggest that, but what I am trying to do is find a third party law professor type to look into the issue and look at it from a more academic, disinterested perspective, as opposed to the advocate. And we spend so much time on the other issues, I haven't got there yet. And that's why I think it's a longer term issue. The complexity of pricing milk that's used in state to make products that are sold out of state. So Randy's tax talks about products sold in state. That's 10%. And that's 10% that comes with the issues that Mike raised. The milk that's used in state and turned into products that's sold out of state, that's 60%. You know, that's 6 times the milk volume, and it doesn't have the issue that Mike raised. So there is some potential there that I just want to make sure we lay on the table for consideration. So it's kind of a 1-2 with Randy's. It's not instead of Randy's, but you've got 10% of the milk in state being used and 60% of the raw milk being used for products that go out of state. And we need to look at what the state might be able to do for both of those in the longer term.
Yep. Any other questions by any of the committee members of the issues? We'll have a round table discussion, where we can all pitch in and chat about all the different ideas. But I think we have a pretty good base to work from to put a real good report together and possibly some good legislation together to go with it. Did you have anything, Michael, that you wanted to add at this point in time?
Well, just based off some of the suggestions, recommendations, I'm looking at it kind of as the mechanic is the one that's going to draft the report and the bill. And I think there's a lot of things that you can build off of. For example, I think it was Heather who said that there needs to be additional money for proper feed storage, et cetera, to build into water quality. There is the capital assistance program fund underneath the water quality program. You could infuse that with dollars and increase eligibility under that program and build in driveways or feed storage. And it's currently an innovative program. It doesn't need to be an innovative program. You can make it basically a capital program.
Expand what we already have.
Right. And the Climate Council Action Plan wants that to expand anyway to fund climate projects. And there's a lot of interplay between water quality and climate that you could probably fund through that program. Someone said that there needs to be other considerations about buying local. There is already a current statute that says other considerations being equal, state institutions need to buy Vermont food and dairy for those institutions. So I think one of the things you might want to talk people to talk to is BGS as the purchasing entity. Why is BGS not buying Vermont milk for prisons, et cetera, and other state institutions? Is there a way to work constitutionally within that framework to make it affordable or the best choice for BGS to buy for state institutions? There are other mechanical things that, for example, the Climate Action Plan wants to increase different silage techniques or soil tillage techniques. That's above and beyond the current regulatory requirements in the RAPs and the medium farm and large farm permits. That's perfect for a payment for ecosystem services program. And you already have a payment for ecosystem services program that Senator Starr and Senator Cattell set up like 18 years ago, the Farm Agronomic Practices Program. It needs a little bit of refinement to do what the Climate Action Council wants, but it's there. I mean, it's an existing program, and you could tailor that to do what the Climate Action Plan wants for alternative tillage, et cetera. But you've got building blocks to do some of the recommendations that you've made. Not building block for everything, but there's definitely building blocks already in place for you to build off of to do some of these recommendations.
Jackie, do you have a question or a statement?
Yes, thank you, Senator. I had two questions for Michael. On that BGS buying local milk, when we worked on that definition of local, I thought we did not include dairy just because the issue that we had. I remember we were trying to figure out miles and stuff, and I thought that we didn't include dairy in that. And the second question I had is the Farm Agronomics program the one that buys the drag lines? Is that something that is done through that program?
I would have to check with Laura and Ryan, but it used to be, but there's also now another program that it could be funded through that program. I would have to check with them to see how they're funding those.
Okay. And the dairy piece, Michael, do you remember that discussion? I thought that we did not include milk. That was part of the problem.
Of local, and I thought that it was included. It's just a little bit of a tortured definition.
I do remember that conversation.
I'm just gonna have to find it.
Yeah, that's not that. We probably need to check that before we go that end, and maybe we need to fix that. But I remember having the discussion with Senator Hardy that year, and it was just it was really hard to define what Vermont milk was going to be. So
it's here. It's in 9 VSA 2465A for raw agricultural products local to Vermont means it is milk where majority of the milk was produced on animals.
Okay, thank you.
The other, along that same line, committee, that's an issue that we've got to drill down deeper on, whether or not we have a local Vermont processor that's actually processing like small packaged milk products for our schools and for our institutions. I'm not sure whether Hood does that in over in Barry, or if they bring trailer loads in from another plant in Mass to Barry and then distribute it. But I know that was on my list to double check that and make sure that we should have a processing place in Vermont and bottling capacity to supply our own institutions and our schools with Vermont milk. And you know, we've got what, a 1.5 billion pounds that maybe we need a home for.
No, way less than that.
Uh,
Something under 1 billion.
So if we could get rid of using Vermont milk in packaging, right here at home, you'd save the transporting of that milk if it does have to go to a different plant out of state to be packaged. You'd save that transportation. You'd have Vermont milk going high quality, known high quality milk going to our schools. We could set up maybe a better tasting product by adding more solids to the low fat to make it taste like real milk instead of chalk. And so I think there's a lot of room for improvement within the dairy industry to get rid of more dairy products right here at home. But we're going to take a little short break and then come back at quarter of 11, I believe, and we'll keep going around and try to get to some resolve.
Can I? Linda provided us fudge. So you guys who didn't get here, we're having homemade fudge. So just if we could offer it, we can.
Yeah,
I'm eating oatmeal.
Caramels, excuse me, caramel. And then Jackie, I had a question for you. You're in Georgia? You
Yes.
said? And you have a Cleveland Browns and Ohio State. Just
You're lucky I'm not wearing a bag over my head right now, Danny. It was a horrible weekend for us.
well, I didn't mean to rub it in. I was just.
Oh, yeah, you did.
No, I really didn't. I just kind of wondering, there's a connection, that's all.
No, I'm originally from Ohio, and I
Yeah.
brought the horribleness with me to Vermont. So it's it's a sad tale.
Okay.
So we'll take a quick break. And
John O'Brien.
John, do you have an issue?
We could probably bring it up later, but just to throw it out there for what you were just talking about, Bobby, and Mike O'Grady might have some insight on, was I just had a question about thinking about institutions and those sort of captive markets. Is it illegal, or are there say state government and private business partnerships in this field? So for example, say we want to get string cheese into schools, but Hood Booth Brothers say, makes a string cheese, but they can't compete with the USDA pricing for that. They're always too high. So the USDA goes elsewhere and gets it from the happy cows from California. Is it possible for a government to say, partner with a Hood and say, well, we'll make up, the 10-cent difference so that our New England or our Vermont bid will actually be lower, and yet the farmers get the benefit from that? Do you know of any partnerships like that, Michael?
I'm sorry, John, could you repeat that?
I was just wondering if states and private businesses partner sometimes when they're, say, federal bid orders. So if the USDA says we want, fluid milk or string cheese in schools, and it goes out to bid, and the big players always win those bids because they can deliver a lower price product. But if the government, in this case, say the state of Vermont, said for New England, we're going to subsidize, make up that gap coverage between what we're losing, and so we essentially win the bid with Hood or Booth Brothers or Agrimark or whoever.
So that's obviously been done in Vermont more at the local level, with development and or construction. I don't know of it at the regional level. Dan, do you know of that type of private-public partnership on the regional level for bidding on federal contracts?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that, John, but it sounds like, I could see some concerns, where with the states bidding against each other, defeating the purpose of a federal program to keep the cost down. But on the other hand, it sounds like an interesting approach, to the problem of how a state can promote the use of its products in state, which is federal law is usually responsive to. So there's a tension in there that may explain why it hasn't been done, but it's certainly something worth exploring to see whether it could be done.
I mean, New York has been doing public-private partnerships for business development for a while, whether or not it's economic zones with tax-free siting and or just incentive siting.
Vermont too, yeah, obviously.
Workforce bonuses, things of that nature. I mean, that kind of public-private partnership has a long history.
But you don't have an underlayment of federal requirement of trying to provide a uniform product across the country at its lowest cost, and how you would open that up. It's an interesting idea.
But didn't you guys pass that, I thought, in the farm to, what was it, the farm to school, or there was a bill was it last year? Where the local, or maybe it didn't pass, the local schools were going to be given financial incentives to buy local food. So if that bill passed, we must have precedence on doing something like this. I think all Representative O'Brien is talking about is subsidizing the difference, I think.
That is my understanding, was a different program. It was based off of New York. And I don't know, Senator Starr, did it ever pass? I thought it kind of got caught up last year.
Well, John, did you guys pass that over on the health side, do you know? In the Ag Committee?
No.
I don't think so.
So it'll be up in the health and this year, I would presume.
I think it went to education. It's in education, I think.
It was basically a state program that if you bought local food for your school and you could prove it was local, and it could be funded through the feds, but if you bought it local, you also got a payment on top of that.
Right.
From the state.
Right.
So you're still utilizing the federal educational lunch and breakfast programs and buying through those programs. But if you then can show a local purchase, you get a payment on top.
Right.
That was but that got all twisted up in our Senate Ed Committee, and we ended up doing a breakfast program real near the end of the session, and I think that went over to Health Ed.
Mm-hmm.
But we were trying to do a lunch program out of Ag, and then it got ratcheted down to just a breakfast program.
Well, I'm just wondering if that's close to what Representative O'Brien is talking about, or if it's still floating around there, it might have the ability to do what he's talking about.
Yep.
Yeah, I was thinking Jackie, an example might be if I don't quite understand how USDA bidding works for, if it's regional or national, but if, string cheese, say, was the winning bid was 90 cents and Hood Ruth Brothers, could only do it at $1, that the state of Vermont would say, we'll pay 11 cents to you so you can underbid Lucerne or Dean Foods or whoever and win the bid, and thus provide regional milk or Vermont milk to Vermont schools or New England schools.
Interesting.
I think there's probably Commerce Clause issues with that. And a close corollary is when a state gives a preference for the purchase of a good. So you're going to purchase this good and the private company is going to purchase it and they're going to put a premium on it. And the state pays that premium. There's what's called retribution laws and other reciprocity. So if you do it to that New York product, or you give that preference to the Vermont product, New York's going to do it back to the Vermont product. It's going to add a price or a premium on top of that Vermont product to make that Vermont product non-competitive in the marketplace. So you have this fight back and forth when states try to legislate in that way. And I'd be concerned that the state trying to enter that regional contract, you'd basically be getting into a kind of a war back and forth between the states. And it would raise Commerce Clause issues.
Okay. So you want to take no more than 10 minutes and we'll fire back up at